talking about something.
Well, the thing
Hey,
is, I thought
we're
I
live.
did it. Yes,
Oh,
and so we've decided now, everybody, welcome to Site Reliability Chats, that I have to hit the go live button anytime Jason is mid-sentence.
mid-sentence. And then you get the random things that I say out of context that mean nothing.
This is true. I get that on a daily basis. So if we can bring that to you, our viewers, it's amazing. But welcome to Site Reliability Chats on April 20th, 2022. Cue Jason up for a joke here.
I don't have any good jokes about 420.
Okay. Well, that said, I'm Julie Gunderson, Senior Reliability Advocate here at Gremlin, and we're joined by Jason Yee.
I'm Director of Advocacy at Gremlin. I did find out, though, so since it's 420 and recreational marijuana is legal here in California, because I'm here in San Francisco for AWS Summit San Francisco. If you are in the San Francisco area, AWS Summit is a free event. So go ahead and register for that. We'll drop a link in the show notes. It's going on today, April 20th, Wednesday, and tomorrow. So drop by and say hi at the Gremlin booth. But fun fact about recreational marijuana in California is looking up where the nearest dispensary was. Turns out it's in the mall. I never thought we'd hit a day where you would just like go to the mall and like next to like, I don't know, Hot Topic or whatever is in the mall these days, because I haven't been to a mall. There would be a pot shop. So there's that.
Okay, that's actually good to know. I would like a picture of this if you end up doing any tourist shopping at the mall.
I unfortunately will be too busy to do that, so I brought some of my own.
Well, I'm excited that you're there. I'm still here in Idaho, where it is sunny and then snowing and then sunny and then snowing. So we're kind of all over the place. It also sounds like we've got some friends at AWS Summit too. So kind of excited to maybe chat about that. Maybe next week we can hear a little bit more about it. Today we actually had some fun things actually to follow up on. So one of the things that we wanted to talk about was an update on the Atlassian outage that started on Monday, April 4th, 2022. So if you remember, we talked about this last week on Site Reliability Chats, where Jason and I had a fun discussion around the 400 Atlassian cloud customers that experienced this outage, where I said, to me, that's a huge number. And Jason was talking about SLOs, and maybe it's not a huge number. The good news is for folks, though, that as of April 18th, according to Atlassian, they have restored all the customers impacted by the outage, and now they're reaching out to key contacts for each affected site. So, Jason, you want to bring everybody up to speed here as to what happened?
Yeah, this is fantastic, partly because not only did they get the issue resolved faster than they initially had said to people, or the ETA that they had given to those customers. But beyond that, they have this post on the Atlassian engineering blog that actually explains the issue. And so the issue, as they've explained it, is basically they have a tool. Well, there's a few things, but they have a tool that is designed to delete data because of reasons, mostly around compliance. Sometimes when customers leave, you're not allowed to keep their data, right, due to compliance for things like GDPR that control what data you're allowed to store. But that tool, being like many of the tools that we use, is a multifaceted tool. It does other things as well, including backups and restores and things like that. Also, the fun thing behind this issue that they explained is there are multiple teams involved, as you would imagine from a large company like Atlassian. And so there was a miscommunication between the teams on the account IDs that were supposed to be essentially migrated off of a legacy system. So as we talk about, there's no singular root cause for things. The contributing factors here are, one, the miscommunication. So the team that had identified the account numbers provided an entire list of account numbers, including companies that were not supposed to be migrated or affected. And so they passed off this list of IDs to the team that was running the tool. And rather than running the tool to migrate these accounts from the legacy system to a newer system, they actually ran the command that would delete the data. And so you can see how both of those, the wrong account ID numbers and running the command to delete everything, led to this. So that's the backstory behind this.
And if you're going to hear any theme today, it's going to be back to there really is no single root cause because there's so many contributing factors. And, once again, to all the engineers over there at Atlassian, we know that this was a really stressful time. On last week's episode, we did offer to buy you coffee, so feel free to reach out to Jason and I. You can find us on Twitter if you need to reach out to us and need a little bit of coffee on us. But good job on getting that service back up. I think one of the things that I kept seeing over and over in the articles and the people who may have been pretty rough on Atlassian was it did also sound like there was a little bit of a communication problem to the customers. And so that was another thing that you got to always remember when you're looking at your incident response process, is to think about your communication and how that's happening with your customers through what channels, and making sure that all the customers are getting communication. Because when you look at some of the tweets that went out on this incident, it was less about the incident and more about people saying there was a lack of transparency, or they weren't hearing things, and maybe Atlassian didn't care about them because their bill wasn't big enough. So those were some of the tweets that I saw. That said, a great retrospective here in all of the things that, or a postmortem, and all of the contributing factors and opportunities for improvement. I'm going to be looking forward to seeing that. Jason, any other thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that this brings up is we often make these tools that are multifaceted, that have, you sort of want that one tool that allows you to do all of the things that you would encompass for your job, right? And so you have these various subcommands for them. One of the things that it reminded me of was John Allspaw always talked about this when he got into the whole safety science or resilience engineering and did the doctorate program at Lund University. A lot of the information that came back out of that he started sharing was around, what do you have in your tools that sort of guards against accidents, right? Because we often say there's no such thing as human error. People do the best that they can with the information that they have. And so some of that he would often talk about is, when this command to delete all of that information, when that's run, like, is there a confirmation? Is there enough information there to really, have the operator understand what's about to happen, right? Because assuming that they were running this command, typing that in and hitting enter, ideally there'd be something that says, like, are you sure you want to delete 400 accounts, right? And that would be a very, very obvious clue to the operator, like, no, I meant to migrate those rather than delete them. Hit no or cancel or whatever on that. So as you're building your tools, for those folks out there who are on the developer tools or developer experience side of reliability, start to think about that. What confirmations do you need? What information do your operators need to have when they're making these commands or running these commands?
Thank you, Jason. And now on to our next story. And this is a little bit of a throwback almost to one of our first stories. So there was another outage for the electronic health records systems for Cerner systems. So if folks remember, a few weeks ago, we actually talked about an incident that occurred with VA software in Spokane, Washington area hospitals, and also some Idaho hospitals and some Washington hospitals, or Wyoming hospitals, Wyoming, Washington, Idaho, due to a bug in a software update that actually took out medical records. Well, this is a different story now. This incident started with a failure of one of 3 Oracle databases. And actually, this occurred just this week. Long story short, the Citrix nodes were restarted. It restored the services. There was no data loss or corruption. The last incident was due to a migration. And so we're seeing these issues over and over with Cerner, and we're not coming down on them. It's just an interesting point to note that now this is actually, I think there was 1 week where I didn't include something because I didn't want to harp on them too much. But I find that it's interesting that Oracle is currently actually seeking antitrust approval to acquire Cerner for $28.3 billion. And so when faced with these incidents and outages that are happening, now we're seeing federal investigation into what's going on here. Jason, thoughts?
Yeah, this one's interesting. I mean, we don't like to punch down on folks when there are numerous outages, but it is an interesting story that's been unfolding of having the migration issues and running on Oracle databases. And the subtext of this, and it's not entirely clear, but I believe the Oracle databases are Oracle Cloud hosted, which is one of the reasons why an acquisition seems to make sense. But I think the lesson for all of us is as we look at this, whether or not Oracle acquires this company, most of us are either in the cloud already or moving to the cloud. And so for things like this, where your databases and your data stores are in the cloud, you have to start to think about what's reliability look like, right? If you're running large amounts of data there, what does replication look like? How fast does it take you to cut over? If something fails, do you have backups? There's a lot of stuff that the cloud provides us and makes much easier than if we were running them on-prem, but you still have to think about all of that, and things like recovery time and recovery point objectives and failover time and failover objectives.
Yeah, and there's obviously a lot of costs with having those redundancies, but when we're talking about medical systems, electronic health records, that's, I think, where we really need to have those conversations about the costs associated with, we can't risk not having access to health data when we're talking about folks in VA hospitals who might be undergoing surgeries or needing medications. And so when we look at our systems and services and understanding how important those are, maybe my not being able to order the newest Lego, which is the DeLorean, which I'm very excited about, that might not be life or death. And so redundancy for Lego might be different. And I'm just making this up. I don't know what their systems look like, although I wish I did. So if anybody out there from Lego is watching, I really want to talk to y'all. But when we look at something like Lego compared to electronic health records, that's where we really need to double down and understand our systems and how the dependencies work and how reliable they really are, because now we're getting into people's lives, which is why we see the federal government starting to investigate this. But what's interesting is when we look at the S&P Global, actually, the Thousand Eyes report that came out, which comes out every week, they actually picked up on this Oracle outage, the Oracle Cloud outage being one of the major 2 that they reported on this week. So there was a network transit provider, Hurricane Electric LLC, that had an outage on April 13th that affected customers in the US, Canada, and 6 other countries. It was about a 23-minute interruption versus the Oracle one, which is very similar. They had that outage that impacted downstream partners using Oracle Cloud services in the US and 11 other countries. And that interruption ran for 38 minutes across 2 occurrences over a 45-minute period, according to S&P Global. So when I went to do a little bit more research on the Oracle outage, I was actually directed back to the electronic health records at Cerner. So I just found that was really interesting, because this wasn't one of those outages that made major news headlines like when, TikTok goes down. But in other kind of interesting news. On the reliability side, Monday was tax day.
It was. So
And
hopefully, for at least for those of you watching from the US, that is.
yes.
For everybody else in the world, we wish you were you. But if you aren't familiar with how taxes work in the US, basically there are a bunch of companies that make tax software and provide services around helping folks file their income taxes to the government, both federal and to states. We are not as advanced as most other countries where they just automatically take the right amount and mail you like a postcard that says how much they've taken, and you can contest that if you need to, which generally people don't. In the US, it is extremely complex. And this is because we have bad politics and people lobby the government to keep them complex so that they could sell these services and make money. So that's the backstory for folks outside of the US.
Now, this would be what we call a peak traffic event. So Monday, being tax day, is the day that everybody who waits until the last minute, myself included, would go to file their taxes. I was talking to my partner James, and he was like, well, everybody just shouldn't wait till the last minute. And then he realized he forgot to file his taxes. So see, either wait to the last minute or apparently don't do it at all. But that said, do file your taxes on time. There were some articles that talked about how the website crashed. And the IRS is very, very clear that their website did not crash. This was not an outage, according to the IRS. What they did say is the IRS online account tool is seeing high demand, and taxpayers may experience short delays or wait time to access some features, the agency said in a statement late Monday. So here's the thing. Some people might actually end up with penalties for not filing their taxes on time. And I did see somewhere that I think in California, they were going to do something to pause the penalties for folks who ran into this not outage situation with the IRS website. But again, this shouldn't have been a surprise. So Jason talks about not punching down, which is great. I don't think punching the IRS is punching down at all. We do love all of the folks working on these systems to make sure that they're reliable. That said, one of the things that we talk a lot about in chaos engineering is being prepared for peak traffic events. So we talk about this a lot with like Black Friday or Cyber Monday. So I tend to be a little bit more, as I say, persnickety when it comes to things that we could be prepared for. But Jason, what do you have different thoughts? Because I know sometimes we agree.
My thoughts around this are pretty simple, right? It's that you may not have had an outage, but ultimately, outage or no outage doesn't matter. The question is, can your customers or can your users accomplish what they need to accomplish? And this is where reliability and performance engineering have this nice overlap, because performance engineering is all about delivering to your customer in terms of speed or latency. Like, what do people expect? And so it's not enough to say that I didn't have an outage when people are having a really poor experience with your website. There's often the statistics of like how much money Amazon loses or Google loses for every millisecond of latency that's added to their website. And I would say the same thing for any company, right? You may not be down, but if your site is slow enough that people can't use it to accomplish what they want, or they're getting frustrated, then it's just as bad as being down.
Agreed. And I mean, sometimes we just realize that we have to deal with things. So next year, hopefully filers will either remember to file by tax day. So that's good to not forget, but also to do it ahead of time. However, hopefully the IRS will learn from this too and make their systems a little bit more resilient to heavy traffic times. I say that with a smile, of course, because, well, the odds of that happening, may they be ever in your favor. That said, though, There was an interesting story that Mandy Walls actually sent our way about the Cloudflare wrote this great write-up for an incident, a slowdown that occurred in December due to pipe fail. Jason, wanna talk about this a little bit?
Yeah, this one is really interesting, and we'll link to the post in the show notes. So highly recommend that folks go read this. Julie and I had some fun chatting about this because there's a lot of parts to this particular incident. But basically, the gist of it is Cloudflare is a large CDN. A good chunk of internet traffic flows over Cloudflare's networks. And so keeping things fast is very important, but also fighting hackers and just bad actors. And so one of the things that they've got in place is this program called DOSD. DOSD is a program that really just watches out for denial of service attacks. And so as part of what that does is it collects IP addresses and really just creates a catalog of where is it seeing potential attacks from, and then nodes can easily access that information and decide what to do with it, basically to block those attacks and prevent them from propagating. The issue here, though, is within their code, as you can see from the title, there's a thing called pipe fail. And so they have a bash script that's running, and as we often do with bash scripts and with scripting in general, you chain commands together using a pipe, right? So if you're using Unix or Linux, you write one command, you use the pipe character, and that sends the output of one command as the input to the next command. And so you can chain things together. What had happened for this particular one is as it's taking those addresses down, it's saving them in a data store, basically, and there's a key, and that key is critical for looking up the information. But with that pipe, also, hi, Charlie, for those who are watching Julie's little screen, that's Charlie. I always say hi to Charlie when he wanders in. Back to the story, though. When a command fails, it will return an exit code. And so often that will be a 0 or a number. When you pipe that, unfortunately, if you're not expecting it to error out, it will pipe that information as the input to the next command. And that may not be the input that you want. And that's essentially what happened here. Turns out, though, that this has been accounted for in Bash and in Bourne Shell, where it was initially born about 30 years ago was when they added it.
Jason and I were actually, just to go on a little side note tangent, Jason and I were looking up when Bash was released. Jason, what did you say, 1979?
So Bash,
Bash was 1989. Yeah.
Yeah, and Bourne Shell was 1979. So Bourne Shell is the standard shell that's on most Linux and often Unix systems. Born Again Shell is the newer version of that, and by newer we mean 1989 again, so 32 years ago.
Yeah, so it sounds like it was like what they were saying in the article is that it was like 30 years ago that people the first users of Bourne Shell were burned by this pipe fail. And so there is an option to enable pipe fail so that when any command in a pipeline series fails, the entire pipeline fails, but it's not enabled by default. Correct. So it's widely recommended as a best practice that all scripts should start by enabling this.
So on top of that, there are some other options that you'll want with pipe fail. So if you are writing any shell scripts, you want to set E. E is for error or exit. I'm not quite sure which one it is, but basically that means anytime an error occurs, the entire shell script will exit, which is what you want, because you don't want things to continue when there's an error, because that usually just propagates the error. So you want to set E. You want to set O as well. So setting O, if I recall correctly, will output the error that's the first in the chain rather than the last. So if you have a pipe fail, you don't really want the exit code from the last command that's run, because that's the command that's receiving the bad data. You want it from the first one, that's the one that generated the error. And the last one is U, which I'm failing to remember now. But generally, if you're doing any shell commands, set E, O, U, pipe fail. That will make your shell scripts far more robust and less likely to propagate errors.
Well, thanks for that, Jason. And, kind of going back to this one, this was really interesting because, first of all, this was just a slowdown. So I really appreciated that Cloudflare wrote something that we could all learn from something that happened back in December. It wasn't a major incident. It was like, what, a half hour, something along that. But this was a combination of unfortunate events that caused all of this to occur. So Jason loves to talk about Hirams Law, which we will show here. You were talking with Alex Hidalgo about this on one of the BTOP episodes that we do here at Gremlin.
Yeah, we run a podcast called Break Things on Purpose. You can get it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And last year, January 2021, we had our friend Alex Hidalgo, who's over at Noble9, a company that focuses on SLOs. So Alex came on and was chatting about a fun incident from NYU where students realized that there was a way to email all students at NYU, that's New York University, and they basically use this to crash the email system. And so this brought up Hirams Law, which you can see here. But basically it means that if you write an API or really anything, people are going to use it in ways that you don't expect. And they're going to come to rely on those. And as Julie mentioned, Cloudflare in this incident, they were making an update to their API and rolling it out, and they encountered this issue. But they realized part of the way through that a bunch of customers were counting on part of the API that was, I don't want to say buggy, but it did things that weren't expected. And so those unexpected reactions became expected, and users started counting on them, which meant that they actually couldn't do the update that they wanted without breaking a bunch of things for customers.
Yeah, and I am just popping that episode into the chat here. So I apologize that I cannot multitask. That said, Jason may not have wanted to call it buggy. Specifically, Cloudflare did say buggy, that users had gotten used to this very specifically, this buggy code. But it was a little bit more than that, because once they realized that there was an issue, then they went to go roll back these changes. So they did the first rollback to a smaller subset of customers to their tier 2, 3, and then they went to do they broke the rollback into two separate pieces because it had to be done manually by the SREs. The first one, it was like tier 2 and 3 services. The next one was their tier 1 services. And all of a sudden, once there was that second rollback that occurred 45 minutes after the first rollback at 2010, all of a sudden, everything just kind of started breaking. And it actually triggered the pipe fail bug. But this was very specifically due to the fact that their cron jobs actually ran at 10 minutes past the hour, which is the exact same time they started that second rollback. And all of that is actually what triggered the pipe fail bug. And so it was a really interesting combination of events that created this bug. And the interesting thing is too, okay, so once they figured it out, they rolled it back, everything was working, but they realized they didn't actually know what caused the problem officially in the first place. So they didn't just leave it as everything's working. They realized, okay, we have something. We've got this little time bomb that could happen at any point in time. And so we need to understand what caused it and how do we prevent this from happening again, which is one of the things that we talk about all the time, right? How do you learn from potential failure. I mean, this was a little failure, but one of the things that I love is that according to Cloudflare, the front line had an unexpected dependency on DOS-D, which caused it to fail when DOS-D failed. We have since removed all such dependencies, and the front line will now gracefully survive DOS-D failures. But I want to very specifically call them out at the end of their article for the beautiful way in which they said, quote, more broadly, this incident has served as an example to us of why code and systems must be resilient to failure, no matter how unlikely that failure may seem. Jason?
I love that statement because it's often the most unlikely failures that lead to our incidents, right? The stuff that we think is likely is the stuff that we're going to try to account for. And so those are often the things that we've taken care of, or we have run books because we think that something might be, an error might occur. And so we want to account for those. The unlikely things that always lead to the incidents that are the worst because you don't expect them and you haven't planned for them.
And that kind of brings us right back to Hirams Law. But Jason, I thought it was always DNS.
Turns out that it's not always DNS. Sorry, friends at NS1 that always like to say that it's DNS. This particular blog post comes to us from our friends at Datadog. So I guess mostly some of my friends because I used to work there. So shout out to Laurent Bernay and David Lentz for writing this up. This one is amazingly deep and extremely technical. It is a good example of that constant reminder to dig deeper, right? Even when something is solved, you want to dig deeper. I'm not sure where exactly to start with this, but basically, Datadog had this issue where when they rolled out updates, they saw a spike in latency. And so some of this was trying to dig into why was that happening. If you read the article, there's a lot of complexity to this, but it basically starts to involve DNS, but also the way that gRPC works in communications, and also Kubernetes and networking. Basically, the gist of this, or one of the key parts of it, is in networking. When a pod is deleted, there's still some caching, and there's still a bit of delay if you're working on a high scale system in systems that will try to access the pod that no longer exists, and what happens with that. And so I'm not going to dive too deep into this because it is extremely long. But basically, as you start to think of your systems, start to think about what happens when they no longer exist and how you handle that. In this particular case, traffic was sort of going to them, but also through a secondary network connection that caused Martian packets to be, or packets to be identified as Martian packets, or basically invalid packets. So essentially communications were going into a black hole. It's a good thing that there's a chaos engineering attack for this, so you can check for things like this. But when those communications were not being confirmed or denied, there were retries happening that built up and led to a bunch of other things. So again, this thing's super, super deep. So go read the blog post. We've posted that in the show notes and into the chat. Lots of really great detail there. So many, 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 many layers. And I'll just leave it at that.
And with that, then, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can find us on youtube.com/gremlin. You can also find Jason and I on Twitter. So definitely find us, talk to us. Remember, if you are an engineer from Atlassian, we'd like to buy you coffee. And Cloudflare, thank you for that amazing write-up. Good luck for everybody that forgot to file their taxes or couldn't file their taxes. And with that, enjoy your April 20th.